So this is something I've been thinking about lately. I've been thinking about monotropic flow and how sometimes it's great. I mean, we love it, but sometimes it can feel like a problem too. So often this doesn't have to do with our brains or anything. Like our brains aren't the problem. It has to do with the world that we're trying to operate these monotropic brains in. If you don't know what monotropic is or what monotropism is, we'll get into that too. Now, the reason that it can kind of maybe seem like a problem sometimes is a lot of days. These days are asking us to keep things like our email and our chores and errands, our appointments and small talk, stuff like that, all available in our brains, maybe simultaneously or almost simultaneously, which is the opposite of how a monotropic brain like ours wants to actually operate. And this monotropic state can be so regulating for our nervous systems. That's the great part. So forcing that monotropic split all day long between all of these things that we have to get done or we feel like we have to get done and forcing ourselves to just skip monotropic flow, a thing that regulates us, is a pretty common way, or it's at least one way, that we can end up in burnout. So let's talk about what this monotropic flow actually is. I mean, you might call it monotropic flow. I call it monotropic flow. It's just how I've been hearing it myself say it for too long. Anyways, because once you have this word for it in either pronunciation, a lot of your life can just kind of start to make a lot more sense. You might have experienced something like this, something that you care about. It just kind of pulls you in. It kind of sucks you in. And the rest of the world just kind of fades out of focus. Hours might pass without you noticing any other things in the world. And then like when somebody finally maybe interrupts you, they walk into the room, it can feel physically wrong. It might even feel painful or something. For a lot of us, autistic people, ADHD people, and especially those of us with the AuDHD neurotype, autistic and ADHD, that deep single channel focus that we get into is the most natural place that our attention wants to go. It's the most natural state for our brains. Now, this theory of monotropism, this is a theory. It was developed by autistic researchers. It's not a settled piece of neuroscience. It's not a diagnostic trait as well, to my knowledge. The main element of this general idea is that at any one moment, the amount of attention that you have available as a human being is generally limited. So a monotropic brain puts most of that limited attention that us humans have in general into a single thing. It's kind of like that channel. It's usually like one interest or one task or one thing at a time. And this can give you like this enormous amount of depth and focus on that one thing while almost everything else drops outside of what this theory calls your attention tunnel. So a more polytropic brain or polytropic brain, it spreads its attention more evenly across many things at a shallower level. So it's the same attention level in both kind of brains, but this one is going out to multiple things at once or in sort of rapid succession. Now, most autistic and AuDHD people tend to sit just further towards this monotropic side, and a lot of ADHD people do as well. So when we're forced into a more polytropic way of working, when our brain prefers monotropism, most people in the space, generally in the community space as opposed to research, call this a monotropic split. So it goes against what feels good and natural for us. So doing that split can feel bad, and it can feel dysregulating as well as a result. So how exactly do we get into monotropic flow, this good place that we like to be, that we like to do? Because your experience might be like mine, where it feels or seems way outside of our control to actually get into this state. Like we're not summoning this state with willpower or an intent to regulate or anything like that. Like, hey, regulate, do monotropism. Doesn't work like that. Although we could potentially make an educated guess if it's our passion and we have all of the conditions for this state set up right, because our regular environments often aren't. So monotropic flow tends to kind of show up or happen when the thing in front of you genuinely pulls your interest. And also when the space you're in is free of distractions, so it's like quiet enough that you aren't facing constant interruptions from people and you're safe enough to just let your guard down. That mask is gone. And also there aren't sensory like nightmares, like glaring lights or terrible sounds, whatever that is for you happening. So if you don't have this fundamental deep interest, or you add a bunch of like competing demands or things to do or a crappy environment, you're probably not going to get into this particular flow state, no matter how firmly you might tell yourself monotropic focus now. Not going to work. So for a lot of AuDHD people, this can be particularly frustrating because the ADHD side of our brains, they don't really work that way, but the ADHD parts, it can make the pull into this state really hard to like schedule. And the autistic side can make it very hard to get back out of the state once you're just right up all in there, regulating and stuff. A question I've heard and get and have read about is how can you even recognize when you're in monotropic flow or when you're heading for some kind of like, I don't know, crash that can come after a monotropic flow. So a lot of just common advice in this general space and in general nervous system or trauma related spaces, the advice assumes that everybody can read their own body just on cue by just checking in. And plenty of us, especially neurodivergent brains, cannot do this. So interoception, which is like an internal sense of what your body is doing, what's going on, what you can notice, this thing is on a pretty wide spectrum or range of experiences. And if you have low interoception, or if you have alexithymia, just sort of waiting to notice how you feel, or like a sensation like a tight chest or a rumbling stomach or whatever might not happen or work for you, or it might be very faint and easy to miss. And this is especially true. It's like added on to immensely if you happen to be in a monotropic flow state. So think of like a menu. Like you go into a restaurant and you have a menu of all the possible signals. You can see which ones of those signals you might be able to actually access even when you're in a flow state. So some people notice like maybe the pace of their thoughts. They might be speeding up thoughts or they might be slowing down. Or some people might be able to notice just their general high level energy. Or they might notice how like loud or quiet things might feel on the inside. There might be maybe stimming involved that you can notice changes in, or maybe you notice like a color, a state in the room, or maybe an image in your mind. Some people might be completely external, like they might notice the time on a clock just having kind of jumped forward suddenly, magically. Or maybe a notification, like on a smartwatch or something similar to that. Maybe your stomach actually does rumble and you do notice that. Maybe that's kind of more of an external notification for you. That one works for me sometimes. Or your dog, it's completely external. Your dog might bark to go out for a walk, and that might take you out of the flow state. And that might be happening because your dog noticed their internal clock that it's dinner time. None of these things mean the same for everyone. And we don't all have the same setup or access or capacity. So the work here is figuring out which of your own signals tend to show up when you're deep in flow state, internal or external, and which ones of these tend to show up maybe when you've pushed past your limit of this flow state. So neutral, by the way, neutral does count as well. So being regulated can feel pretty ordinary, which might even be unusual to us. And the useful skill is learning to spot your own patterns in this, or creatively figuring out what might be available that you have capacity for and access to, whatever that happens to be. So, monotropic flow can be one of the best parts of how our brains work. And now that thing, all those things that I just said, sure were a lot of cautions for something that's quite overwhelmingly lovely. It's often quite rare in our lives to have these lovely things as they are. So when you get to follow your focus, your natural focus, into something that genuinely interests you, something that you can produce, whatever that is, work or art or learning, for example, and you're approaching this with a depth that might even surprise people. And especially importantly, it might surprise yourself as well. So all of this can feel wonderful from the inside, absorbing. It can be so absorbing. It can be so satisfying and joyful in a way that's just, like I said, hard to find anywhere else in our lives. Like this thing, this flow state is almost like it's a ferociously deep and wonderful sense of joy for a lot of us, which is why it can be so regulating for our body mind. Now, there's a nervous system thing that's going on here, and I keep mentioning how regulating these things are. So I'll keep this thing light and quick. So for some of us, like going in and sinking into this focused and very predictable in a lot of ways activity settles our nervous systems down. Our whole body is like settled. And a repetitive, absorbing task, just like a really good stim, can be genuinely regulating. Playful things, very energetic, kinesthetic things is one way that this works very well for me, which is why improv and dance fitness and creative endeavors just sort of end up being a big focus of the things that I do. Like, I'll get into these flow states while researching new information, absolutely. But I find my most regulating and joyful and strong monotropic states occur when I almost just let my brain operate on multiple levels. Autopilot's often one of them, and they kind of share the task almost simultaneously. For example, if I combine music, often a particular song from like a small number of songs, I put them on a single song loop over and over again for hours, even though the song is only a few minutes long, while I'm doing something quite active. I might be drawing, or I might be making choreo for my dance fitness format. That's why I have to listen to the same song over and over. And it was very similar when I did that. Or even I could do writing, like focused attention writing with that single song on loop, because it doesn't draw too much focus away from the thing I'm really deeply focused on, which is the writing. But it's still there and taking up some process or something that helps with this monotropic flow state. But I will let my brain do this work or this task or this creative endeavor. I might be generating new ideas or kind of new avenues and branches to go down this task tunnel with. It's almost like it's there taking up some space, the secondary, say, music or whatever's going on, to just block out any other possible distractions while not being too distracting in itself. So this was me sort of processing and working out what worked well for me. It's going to be different for you. Now, recently, I did a body doubling session in a group setting, and I got a bunch of writing done while I played one of these songs on loop. And the end of the session, it brought me out of this monotropic flow just gently enough that I could task switch quite easily after that. So that's something that I figured out works quite well for that process. Now, speaking of which, there's a ton of gotchas here, because this focus style, it does have a cost, which is related to that thing that I just mentioned. Now, when you're in that deep sort of single channel tunnel thing, your brain is filtering out those signals that it would normally use to tell you to do things like eat or drink or move or stop, like I mentioned. So it's very common for us to sort of just try to come up for air when this flow state has gone on for hours, and we might have gone past that stopping point that would have been maybe beneficial. And we're just kind of wrecked at that point because we've been in this flow for so long and missed every cue. Like we might be exhausted or we might be starting to crash. We're like, what the hell just happened? Because that monotropic state was so good that we're after it wondering, like, why do we feel so bad after doing something that we were enjoying for maybe half the day? And then you're coming out of it going like, holy crap, I got to pee and I'm cranky for some reason. And that's because we don't have any focus on these other things. We don't get those signals while we're spending a ton of energy focusing on whatever we were doing that flow state for. So we just kind of ran ourselves into the ground and suddenly came up for air and noticed that this thing has happened. So the second cost, that thing comes up around these transition points because task switching after a monotropic flow is rough. So trying to pull this monotropic brain of ours out of this channel before it's ready to do so, perhaps, can be maybe painful. It can be maybe jarring. And then the world like that we live in is forcing this split on you suddenly. Like you come up for air and then suddenly you have all these other polytropic tasks on our plate now. And we might have even be interrupted unexpectedly, and then we have to change our brains into this different mode. And this can end up feeling very overwhelming. So you might be startled, right? And that could that startled thing, because we're so focused, can maybe shift the mood from really great maybe to something angry or rageful or sad. So regulated and feeling great to pretty darn dysregulated pretty quickly. And then we might be facing all those polytropic tasks that we sort of put off for a while. And that's not going to help either. Another sort of cost is the gradual road towards burnout that I mentioned near the beginning of this episode. So this is when all of your days are built around like having to do so many things at once or in rapid succession, this polytropic state, because you're doing meetings and messages and errands and social masking or like rehearsing for a conversation or trying to do a bunch of jobs all at once or a bunch of different too many hobbies even. It could be joyful things that you like, but just too many of them. So your monotropic brain is spending all day long working in a way that it wasn't naturally structured for. And that constant strain can wear people down if it happens for months, weeks, whatever, years at a time. And this is even true, like I said, for the fun stuff, the things that we enjoy. Like my mom, when I described this, she was so confused one time because I mentioned, well, if I take up this new hobby, this new thing that I'm considering, I'm going to have to drop my current one that I'm doing. And she asked me why. Like, you enjoy both of those things. You love them both. And I explained that my brain could only handle one of them at a time, because I was working too. So it would have been 3 things. And that was just, no, I couldn't do that. She was so confused. Since I technically had the time and these things didn't cost anything. So why is there a barrier there? But it's my brain. Then my mom, of course, realized, oh, that's exactly like your dad. Like my dad had to give up kiting to take up golf when he was retired. And then he had to give up golf when he started to travel, even though he technically had the time and the funds to do both of those things. But monotropic brain. And AuDHD, we have a lot of interests. We have a lot of ideas. And often these things will go on sequentially because of this monotropic brain. And holy crap, my resume is certainly evidence of this type of brain over the decades. I am running into this again right now. I have 2 current shows that are on kind of different topics, and I have an audio drama, which kind of sort of maybe might progress in amongst all of this, which is exactly why I have to wind improv as a topic into this show a little bit so they seem the same enough to my brain. It's the only way my brain will let me actually do this. And I can tell you, this is exceedingly difficult and going against a lot of aspects of my monotropic brain to even try to do, for example, that audio drama. It's tough to trick this thing. You really can't. Because like I'm telling you this right now, I'm very aware of it. So for AuDHD people like us, it can get really messy another way too. Because the ADHD thing, that pull, can drag you into a flow that you might have not planned. And it might be happening at the worst possible time or even against your logic or whatever. And then the autistic side, or those neurons, won't let you leave that monotropic flow state once you get in there. So you're like going to maybe blow past a deadline that you actually needed to hit. You might have like this stack of half-finished deep projects, that audio drama I was talking about. Each one of these things is something you're really into and you really deeply want to do it. You're so motivated. You love it. But each one is still abandoned the moment that monotropic pull kind of moved you on to something else. It's a very AuDHD kind of pattern. I'm very guilty of this one. So I'm determined to finish my next audio drama. Really, I swear. I will someday. Anyways, you might now be wondering, is monotropic flow an autism thing or an ADHD thing? The answer is there is research about this. A 2023 study actually built a questionnaire for measuring this, and it found that autistic people and ADHD people both tend to score higher on monotropism as a thing than people who are not autistic or ADHD. And I'll link that in the description. So it seems quite likely that plenty of ADHD people live like this as well, even though the theory did start with autism. Now, where autism and ADHD can differ in this flow state is in how the focus behaves once you're in it. So the autistic version tends to be like just really sticky, kind of like you're really in there, because this tunnel or channel or focus that we tend to get into is really, really deep. And switching out of it can be particularly hard because of this, because this is where autistic inertia shows up, right? And that the transition thing is just really painful or very jarring. I jump right out of my seat. I've screamed like I'm so in there. And then somebody's suddenly standing over my shoulder, breathing, and I can hear the breathing suddenly, and that's scary, right? Anyways, I have another episode on transitions and stuff, which I will link to as well in the description. So the ADHD version of this now, this keeps that same strong pull towards that really deep focus, while the thing that's pulling you might keep changing, right? So you can get a hyper focus that you can't really bring on command nearly as easy, and you can't sort of escape once it grabs you. So those things happen. So the pull, it gets you in there, but it might keep changing. So you can get that hyper focus as well, but the things that you're focused on might change. Now, for some of us who are AuDHD, you can get both of these things at the same time. So there's also some sort of exploration from autistic thinkers that monotropism might be the actual like shared thing between autism and ADHD. Although this idea is like speculation, it's like hypothesis. There isn't research that I've found, at least, that's confirmed this thing. I haven't found or seen it, at least. Comment if you know anything. If you've seen it, there's so much stuff out there. So what actually helps once you understand these things about yourself? Great question, you. Two things that I've noticed that are very important for me on this topic. And the first thing is sort of reframing it a bit. So your monotropic focus, this is a resource for us if you have this. And the goal here can be to build a life that works alongside of this, to make adjustments where you can. So you're not spending your energy just forcing this flow that you get into some kind of thing or existence that it wasn't really meant to be. Because I think it's very difficult to control this thing, especially with limited interoception if that's you. So in practice, you're working with your monotropic flow as it is. And this can kind of look maybe like protecting blocks of like single topic time for the work that deserves this kind of depth and focus, and giving yourself just a kind of gentle heads up before a transition or a switch, so it just doesn't hit you out of nowhere and maybe send you into kind of a very dysregulated state. So body doubling, that thing that I mentioned where that kind of worked for me, this might help in some cases where you sort of work alongside other people, just alongside them. They aren't doing the work with you or perceiving you or watching you. You're just kind of have another nervous system there. So you can move kind of into and out of this focus maybe a little bit more easily. Or you might want to look into something a little bit more mechanical that can kind of gently help you make these transitions. Maybe it's like a light on a timer that comes on across the room that you just have to stand up and go address. It might be putting your phone across the room with some gentle music that you have to get up and go turn off and switch. Right? It might help you kind of gently move out of these states, and setting that timer so you definitely have enough time to get into this state and find it regulating before you have to kind of gently move out of it. Now, another thing you could try is it's based in improv, which is the method that I use for a lot of what I do and teach. And it connects to this a little bit more directly than you might expect when I say those words. Hearing that improv word might give you a sense of dread or maybe a sense of laughter. Improv only ever lets you respond to one thing at a time, because you are really deeply, actively listening and in the present. It can kind of bring up a flow type state. It does for me. Now, there's one scene and there's just one offer in front of you at any given moment. And your whole job is to be just fully present with that topic, with that thing, and nothing else in that particular moment. So on stage, going all the way into one thing is the point. And it's a place where our kind of natural way of paying attention becomes a real strength in that situation. And dance fitness was another example. It was the same for me there, because I had to operate my brain on kind of three different things. Like, I'm in the room with the people. I'm also have this autopilot about the choreography and the things I have to do. And I had the music playing as well. So I got into this very, very intense flow state that was very regulating, and regulating afterwards, more so than just participating in the class. So this is just the idea, right? That there might be other activities that can help you get into a monotropic flow state for some very potentially intense and beneficial regulation purposes using our monotropic brain style. So this will be different for you, but it's a matter of creatively sort of investigating and seeing if there might be another way for you to experience this regulating behavior with our brain type. So understanding this flow state, how it can help, and the gotchas involved is like step one of this process. When you go ahead and start building practices around it in your individual state, that's very individual. And this part can be easier with some level of support, because your version of like designing for monotropic flow won't look the same. It won't look the same as mine. I can't tell you what to do, and it's not going to look the same as whatever your AuDHD or autistic friend does. So this is Wired Divergent, and I'm Jen deHaan. If you want to work on your own version of this with a little bit of support, I have coaching and workshops for neurodivergent adults over at jendehaan.com. You're also going to find a newsletter there, written versions of these episodes, and a whole bunch of other resources on that site. No ads, ad-free. They're free. Over on the podcast, there's also guided regulation practice episodes. I put out those episodes on Thursday. They're all free. They're audio only. Follow along things. And speaking of the podcast, this episode and the other long form episodes are on YouTube as videos as well. Bye for now.